Welcome back to Glasgow, and now an opportunity to go into a bit more detail on some of the themes that we've just been discussing with Barry O'Dwyer. And I'm delighted to do that. We have three CEOs from our sector who will be able to talk about different aspects of the challenges that we face ahead. We have Penny James, the CEO of Direct Line Group, Clare, Bousfield, the Managing Director of Retail and Savings at M&G, and Ekhosuehi, Iyahen, who is the Secretary General of the Insurance Development Forum. Penny, if I can start with you first. So your customers insure their businesses and their homes, their cars, their travel. What are the challenges that you've seen in terms of helping them navigate the choices that they face, particularly when it comes to sort of how they can reduce their carbon footprint?
Well, it's great to be here, Hugh. I think, like Barry, I come out of the last few days incredibly positive about the sheer momentum, really, the innovation that's happening and the collaboration that's happening. But I also come away thinking about some of the language and the nature of what's being decided. It's a world of investments and commitments and complex language. And I think when you have as many customers as we do, it's about how we convert that into a real practical outcome for customers, so that they both have confidence in the direction that we and the broader we are taking, but they also can understand how they play a part in that. So I'll give you an example. We have around 4 million motor customers. We've launched now an EV product, which is aimed at people who want to get electric vehicles and is just designed to make electric easy. So we work with a number of people cross-sector to make sure that they can have hookups in their home, they can have the insurance product itself, they know the repairs will be done by people who are experts in mending EVs, and it's wrapped with educational content so they can make choices between the vehicles as well. It's unusual for us in the insurance sector to be thinking like that, but it's how do we make things holistic and just dead easy for our customers to participate in this journey and reduce their footprint themselves.
And you've been here a few days now. What are the sort of some of the reflections you'll take away from here, things that have really sort of stuck in your mind?
I think there's a few things. I think the first is just the sheer innovation. So I had no idea how many of these technologies and data capabilities and things that are really set up and ready to go. And so then it becomes a question of how you scale more than whether it's possible. And so the second thing is then collaboration, because you only get that scaled if you can bring the money to the party with the people who've got the ideas and the creativity. And a lot of this COP, I think, has been about trying to get those things joined together. But I mean, the overwhelming thing is momentum. I mean, somebody was talking last night about engagement being an exponential curve, and you can kind of feel us moving up, getting steeper and steeper up that curve. So I come away really quite excited about what the art of the possible is now, and just reflecting on how, what journey customers are going to have to go on, who will be receiving all of these impacts over the next few years.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. So Clare, M&G is both an asset manager and an asset owner. Can you explain a little bit of what the difference that makes both for you in terms of your custodianship of the company's assets, but also then in terms of some of the potential customer choices as we look to sort of help customers align their pensions with some of the choices they may have in the future?
So in terms of asset manager and asset owner, Hugh, the simplest way to look at that is, as the asset owner, we basically make the decisions for our customers in terms of making sure that they get good outcomes in terms of their pensions or any investment savings that they're making. In terms of the asset manager, we're actually operating to mandates, either from other insurance companies or from funds in terms of what they're doing. So for the asset manager role, what we have to do is work with our effectively institutions and our fund managers in terms of actually driving them to the outcomes that we think are the right outcomes for them. But ultimately, it's their decision in terms of where they invest their assets. So for us, one of the things I think is really important is recognising this shift from a customer perspective that Barry talked about, in terms of how much people are thinking more and more about their pension pots and their investments and how much that can actually drive good outcomes. But we also have to help them in that process, because the world is shifting. I mean, the amount of capital that is shifting towards sustainability, which we all know is fundamental and important, but that creates risks in terms of what we're doing. So our role is to make sure that we help and we guide customers through that process, and also make sure that their outcomes are protected and we get them the optimal outcome, whether it's return or in terms of the sustainable assets that they're invested in.
And how far do you think that sort of dialogue is progressing on both sides, with both your retail customers, who you're helping, as you say, through asset ownership tracks, but also with your institutional customers who you're working with on the asset management mandates? Give us a bit of a say of the level of conversation and how you've seen it as somebody who's been in the industry a long time, how, where we are in terms of where we were, say, 5 years ago.
So from my perspective, I think it has shifted massively in the last 12 months.
Oh, right.
The institutions, pension funds, and some of the employee benefit consultants have definitely been in this place for a number of years. But I would say from a retail customer perspective and the intermediary environment, there has been a massive shift as we've gone through the pandemic. Whether there's a connection between those two, but I think it is a fundamental shift. And that is inevitably driven by the momentum, I think, from a broader perspective, in terms of us all recognising we need to do things differently, together with the younger population saying, they're holding us to account.
Let's come back to that too. Plenty of interesting themes here. Let's look a bit more global, if we may. And Ekhosuehi, could you tell us a little bit from your insights running the IDF, for those who don't know, a public-private partnership that very much looks to link up insurers with the World Bank and the UN to help find insurance solutions for some of the most vulnerable countries in the world and vulnerable communities. In terms of what you see from where you sit with the IDF, give us a feel for some of the most vulnerable sort of countries and communities as we tackle climate change. Give us a feel for the scale of the problem, and then let's talk a bit about some of the solutions that you've been working on.
Yeah, I think for many developing countries, climate change is not a future. The impacts are current. They're today already, right? Many of them experience hurricanes, the impacts from hurricanes, droughts, etc. So if you take, for example, a country like Dominica, a single hurricane over a couple of hours can go over that country, and in 24 hours you have 200% loss in terms of GDP. How do you recover from such a scenario, right? Or if you take, for example, a country in Africa where you have a farmer, where there is a drought, and he's lost all his crops, he's lost all his animals, his source of livelihood is basically destroyed. And that has an impact not only in terms of his ability to earn, but also for his children or her children in terms of access to education and all kinds of different things. And so for many of the developing countries that we are engaged with, it's a very serious issue. And one of the things that I think has been really quite interesting about this COP is that we have seen a rise in the conversation around adaptation and resilience. It's no longer just a conversation around mitigation. And I think that that is also borne by the fact that we've seen floods in Germany, the UK, many developed countries, right, are now experiencing this. And I try to characterize this as we're getting into a phase where we are now having a shared catastrophe experience. It's no longer something that happens in Africa, Asia, or Latin America. And I'm hoping that that forces us to start to think creatively about the kinds of solutions that are required. And so in that context, there's a significant role that the industry can play. The industry can contribute in terms of risk analytics. We talk about, understanding risks better, right? Bringing transparency to that. And that's important because I think that that informs the kind of innovative kind of risk financing solutions that are required. So for the IDF, our collaboration with the United Nations, with the World Bank, bridging that with the expertise that exists within the industry is really geared towards trying to unlock what should the future look like? What are the protection systems that we need to design for those communities, but also could be quite relevant in the developed country context as well. So those are some of the things that from my institution that drive us essentially and the work that we do.
And give us a flavour of some of the things you're working on at the moment. I know, for example, recently you've been working on a public-private partnership with the German government to try and help, I think, 20 most affected countries. So give us a feel for some of the practical initiatives you've been working on.
So in 2019, the United Nations Secretary General called what was referenced as the Climate Action Summit. And it was really an effort to try to mobilize greater action in terms of climate change. And in the work that we do, engaging many of our governments around insurance is quite complex because we are talking about markets where you have 1 to 2 3% insurance penetration rates, markedly different in terms of, when you're sitting in the UK.
Yes.
Right? So there's a process of engagement and education that needs to take place. And so in reflecting on the complexity of this process, we decided that it would be important to engage with those partners who are already having conversations with many of these governments around their development aspirations.
Yes.
How can we mainstream what is the role of insurance? How can it help you to become resilient? What are the kinds of products that you need to match the kind of challenges that you're having to deal with? And so the partnership with the German government was really focused on this idea of how can we engage 20 countries by 2025 to build better understanding of what the climate, the risks that they face, but also to begin to start to design solutions. So oftentimes we hear about the protection gap, right? And unfortunately, what we are seeing is that the protection gap is actually growing. It's not shrinking. And so that means that we need to pull together resources to start to think about what are the solutions to close that. And so this effort, which we characterize as the tripartite between the UNDP, industry, and the German government, is to try to close that and focused conversations with government, but at the same time, in terms of designing solutions, mainstreaming thinking around risk and resilience and the role of insurance.
Well, that sounds like a pretty important area of work to come. I'd like to come back to that in a minute, if I may. Penny, if we return to the UK, a pretty significant challenge in the UK is how to communicate with customers and lots of different types of customers. I rattled through at the beginning some of yours. About their options and their choices, whether it's in the product that they buy or their choices when it comes to a claim. Can you talk us through a bit of what you think are some of the most important sort of issues facing insurers to try and improve that communication and have a more meaningful dialogue with customers about how they can make choices that help both with their carbon footprint and help the industry deliver more sustainable options?
Sure. I mean, I think, in the context of what's ahead of us, what are the things that customers need to kind of be thinking about? What do they need in terms of coverage? So the protection gap is very different in the UK, but there are still changing shapes on risk even here. Second, they need to be kind of comfortable with what they can do and the choices they make that can influence their carbon footprint themselves. And third, they need to be comfortable that the company that they're working with and the choices that they're making are with a firm that itself is operating best practice and trying to get things right themselves. And all of those things are kind of active choices that we need to encourage customers to make. I think everyone varies. So some people will be all over this looking for data, and we need to find a common way of articulating to people what steps people are taking and how to look at measurement. And the shorthand version is some of the things are around, like, science-based targets should start to give customers confidence that the firms that they're working with are making the right choices. But the real key to this is keeping it simple. If you're worrying about how to get the kids to school, or how to pay the next bill, or your energy bills are going up, or whatever the worries are, how to get on holiday, whatever the worries are in your life, most people don't have time to actually digest this in any great detail. And so those of us who are dealing with customers at any stage in their journey and all of their interactions with us, we need to be mindful about how we bring those choices to them in a really easy and understandable way. So today it's very difficult for a customer to choose whether they want a sustainable repair or even know what one of those might be, or whether they want to use Barry's example to repair or replace and so on. So there's an evolution, I think, for the industry to go on to make those choices simple and clear for people, and to encourage them. We have a role to manage and ensure a transition here. To make them make the right choices towards that societal transition in a kind of controlled way. So lots of work to do to simplify the language, not only that we use, but that everybody uses around the
which probably isn't a strength of our sector to start with, if we're being honest.
It's not our traditional zone, although we are working, to get language much clearer for people, in particular for vulnerable customers. We're working, with charities to try and work out how to help people understand their financial, situation. So there are lots and lots of things that we can do and working together, and the ABI roadmap is a great way of kind of coalescing ideas and best practice around that.
Thank you. Well, a key theme of the ABI roadmap is obviously the investment potential of the sector, something that Barry referred to in the earlier conversation. Claire, when you look at the supply of potential investable assets and the opportunity for the sector, if we put regulation to one side for a moment, in terms of whether it's renewables or different types of financial instrument that are greener than their predecessors, what are your observations about the sort of the supply pipeline now, and what's potentially needed to grow it?
So we have one of the largest with-profit funds, Hugh, in the market, and one of the things that we did earlier on this year was we put some of those funds effectively to invest in sustainable and innovative solutions in terms of supporting sustainability. And I would say that that programme has been exceptionally successful. We're moving a lot faster than we originally envisaged. And actually what we're able to do there is really support the innovation of the UK market in terms of what we're doing in order to assist in terms of the drive towards sustainability. So from my perspective, I don't think there's any shortage of opportunities in the UK market. Yes, they may be more in the private space than the public space, and I think that's one of the things that we need to really think about, because the shift of the amount of capital that is going to shift as we go through the next so many years is going to be critical, and we've got to provide the support in terms of the innovation. And fundamentally, that's exciting. That creates a great opportunity for us to be able to do things differently. So I think that's the important balance between public and private.
And there's been a lot of talk, not least from regulators, about how difficult it is to model some of these risks and to have the sort of traditional data inputs that both they and finance professionals are comfortable with. What are some of the ways in which you're trying to sort of work around the lack of historic data for what have traditionally in our sector been quite backward-looking models?
So I think, I mean, one of the things we've done is we've just put out some targets around interim targets in terms of net zero for our asset owner. And what we've basically said is we believe that 50% of that fund will be net zero by 2030. And what we've done there is we've focused on the public side of the balance sheet, because the quality of the data and the analysis is much deeper and easier to get your head around in terms of where you go. That's not saying that within that target we won't also be driving from a private perspective, but I think it's important in terms of being realistic and also working out what is valuable and useful in that context. Because I'm in the same place as Penny, that we're great at producing, 200-300 page documents that, to be honest, you need to be a rocket scientist to basically work out what you're saying. We've got to get this right in terms of being clear, focused, so that we can actually demonstrate that we're genuinely making a difference in what we're doing, as opposed to putting every single piece of data into any kind of disclosure.
Yep. No, that certainly makes sense, and particularly in terms of being able to communicate with a wider audience about what the industry is doing. Ekhosuehi, if we can go back to your work on a global context, I'm interested in what you've seen so far that works, with the appreciation it's possibly experimental and quite small scale, but it give us a bit of an insight into the future in terms of some of the things that you've seen, however small, that have started to make a difference in terms of the public-private partnerships you've been encouraging.
Yeah, I think it's been a journey for the IDF. We're as an institution trying to get some of the biggest insurers, reinsurers, brokers around the table, speaking the same language, collaborating. And then you add the other piece of how do you collaborate with the UN system, with the World Bank, and then have a conversation with governments directly. So it's been quite a bit of a learning process. So we've had to spend quite some time thinking about our governance, being very clear about how we engage, how companies engage with each other, how they engage with the public sector partners. And we have seen actually that through that process, the governments that we are trying to engage with are actually quite appreciative of the effort that we are making to organize before going to approach them to have such a conversation. And that has actually led to a situation where in some countries, the governments are increasingly approaching the IDF to raise questions around particular problems that they have. So for example, I can give you the case of Peru, where in 2017 there were the El Nino floods, significant damage to infrastructure. And so the government was concerned and came to the IDF and said, we are really interested in designing an insurance solution for public schools, 50,000 public schools. But it's not just about, an insurance for that. We want to work with you to see if we can develop a database of what the infrastructure looks like, right? And that's not only for the underwriting purpose, but so that we can begin to make strategic decisions in terms of how we manage the public schools, the buildings themselves. And that has been remarkable. And we managed to get, Munich Re, AXA XL, JBA Flood Risk are also involved, a number of companies working with the Association of Peru, Insurance Association of Peru, to really think through this kind of solution, which is quite comprehensive. And that's been remarkable because the government is now thinking about how do we expand that to insure hospitals, other types of critical infrastructure. But it's not stopped in Peru, right? We've now launched a project in Mexico, in Colombia, in Medellin, where we are looking at flood risk, but also working with NASA, for example, to think through that. And that is in turn feeding into conversations that we're having with the governments in Ghana and Lagos, who are looking at, you're working on flood risk. How is that developing there? How can we begin to learn from those experiences? So for us, I think, yes, it's collaboration, but there's also a need to pay attention to the governance and how you ensure that partners can engage in a fair and transparent way and align their messages with when they go to approach governments around this question.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's very interesting, and it does make sense in terms of giving governments greater confidence in engaging with you. Yeah. And that's quite a powerful example in terms of that shared practice across different continents, even that governments in those different countries can see value.
Yeah, and I would say even at this COP, we launched 2 days ago a partnership with what's referred to as the V20 countries. And it's a bit of a misnomer because actually 55 of the most vulnerable countries in the world, right?
So it's 20 plus 35.
Exactly, right? No, but it's quite remarkable because, again, these were a group of countries where, they articulated in July, after their first Ministers of Finance meeting, the challenges that they see in terms of mitigation, the challenges that they see in terms of adaptation, and they wanted to work with the insurance industry to develop a public-private partnership on risk and resilience analytics. That's remarkable to have countries approach the IDF and the industry to tap into that kind of resource.
That's great to hear. Our time is nearly at an end, so I'd like each of the panellists, if I may, and I'll start with you, Penny, and work backwards, to give me a hope for what you hope to see during your lifetime as a CEO of some of the things we've talked about today that can change the most. What's your sort of aspiration for something that, as a sector or as a firm, we can make the most progress on?
I think my real hope is that who knows what one's lifetime as a CEO is, but that if the whole industry had a clear plan as to how it was going to travel to net zero, and you could feel real commitment behind it, I think that's got huge impact across the world. That mindset shift would make a massive difference.
Claire?
So for me, Hugh, I think one of the aspects around this that we have to be very focused on is the social aspects of this. And we're very focused on the environmental, climate, etc. And there can be some potentially quite significant impacts socially. So I would like to see those ones really properly addressed with real significant momentum without losing the focus on the net zero in terms of what we do. But to me, the two have got to move aligned.
Yes, because as a sector, we have a responsibility to the poorest in society to make sure that our products work for them and not just for the middle classes. So there's potentially quite a big challenge there. So you're saying there are trade-offs to be explored there?
Potentially.
Yeah, which we don't have time to do, unfortunately, today. That would make for a very interesting follow-up panel if anyone's interested. Yeah. And Ekhosuehi, in terms of your hope for the future, for, say, the next 5 years, in terms of some of the things that you hope you will see come to pass?
Yeah, I think the fact that I will say again, the rise of adaptation and resilience on the agenda is quite an important one. And I think that feeds right into the strengths of the insurance industry. And so my hope is that we know the industry will really step up and lean into those conversations and see how we can work with those countries that are on the front line to begin to design new solutions and new protection mechanisms. That's my hope.
Well, those are three powerful hopes to finish on. Hope today you've got a sense of the power of our sector, of its investment power, the range of customers that we serve, and how much of a difference we can make by working together and sharing best practice. I'd like to thank all my panellists for their excellent contributions, and here's to a great deal of joint working together to try and achieve some of the ambitions we've talked about today. Thanks for joining us.